Season 7, a time of dramatic change for the Thomas & Friends franchise. It's rather famous for being the transition between the beloved classic era and the mediocre hit era. While many cast it aside as being lesser than the greats before it, I don't think that's entirely fair. While, of course, people always praise Gordon and Spencer and hooray for Thomas, I want to point out some cool episodes I think deserve a bit of the spotlight as well. My personal enjoyment of them can come from good characterization, a good payoff of an old story, or even just a fun sequence. To be exact, I found 7 great episodes I rarely ever hear people talk about. To be clear, this isn't some top 6 list, these won't be in any particular order. Along with that, this is all my personal opinion. If you think differently from me, that's what the comments are for. I've compiled these picks in a playlist for you to decide for yourselves, link is in the description. With all that said, I'm Jaden, aka the Wilbert, and these are the 7 hidden gems of Season 7. In this episode, Arthur, not long after being introduced to the railway, discovers the ocean and the fishing village for the first time. When this line is offered up to be run by an engine, Sir Topham Hatt, of course, chooses Thomas. However, he hates fish and doesn't want to run the route. Thomas has his famous pier crash and tells Arthur that he doesn't want the job, culminating with Arthur finally working up the courage to ask Sir Topham Hatt to run the line. He agrees, yada yada, happily ever after. I think that this episode stands out as a hidden gem of Season 7 for a number of reasons. For one, it has a pretty fun crash. That one's a given. But more importantly, it gracefully introduces a new aspect of a character, that being Arthur. It makes perfect sense for Arthur to have never really seen the ocean before, considering his history in the LMS, so him only now finding out that he enjoys the sea fits in great. This helps add more dimension to Arthur, which is especially appreciated due to him being one of many new characters for the season. On top of that, I feel that Thomas is perfectly in character here, as he worries more about the fish spoiling than anything else when he crashes. This to me slots in well with his post-season 5 personality, as he's completed his arc and is therefore generally more selfless, although he does obviously still have flaws. My last point about something fishy is about Arthur's miniature character arc. That's right, in this episode Arthur, a usually shy and meek character, faces his fears and, as the show puts it,
"Me!" Arthur blurted out. "And please, sir, may I run on that line all the time? Thomas doesn't like fish, but I do." "Then the line is yours," said Sir Topham Hatt. Arthur was delighted.
This is another good bit of character development for Arthur, and, in my opinion, helps to make this episode truly one of the best of Season 7. Next up is one that I doubt many of you would have expected to see here. Fergus breaks the rules. This episode is decently well known for, well, Fergus, a relatively disliked character in the eyes of the fandom as a whole. In this episode, Diesel is working at the quarry where he is annoyed by Fergus. He opts to trick Fergus by telling him to work at the smelters. Fergus, knowing that useful engines
Have to do as they are told,
sadly goes to the smelters. There, he encounters Aaron and Bert, who threaten him, scaring Fergus away and causing him to hide in an unused line. Thomas then finds him, Fergus learns that he was never meant to work at the smelters at all, etc. So, before I get to my praise of this episode, there are definitely some critiques that must be addressed. For one, Fergus is so annoying. He says
"Scary!"
so many times, it just gets on my nerves. I don't know, maybe they're just branding getting to me.
puffed Scarloey as he raced down the hill.
In addition, many would argue that it is at least somewhat a departure from Fergus' characterization in the past. However, I think that it's reasonable for Fergus to act this way, considering how he's still shown as a stickler for the rules, and that prior to now we haven't really seen how he would react in
Scary
situation. That all aside, I want to talk about a character that I think was done right, and that's Diesel. I think that this is a good Diesel episode because he is perfectly characterized. For one, he is short-tempered. Just as he was in Season 2, another engine provokes him, and he immediately plots revenge. Furthermore, in both instances, his revenge plot is quote-unquote devious, and leads to the other engine leaving. He has always been a cunning and manipulative threat, and this episode uses that to full extent. All in all, I think that the version of Diesel presented here slots perfectly with that of seasons past, helping to make this episode one of the better of Season 7. On top of that, although the roles are minor, I think that Uri and Bert are handled well here. For one, they're intimidating. Not quite the grim messengers of doom like in Stepney Gets Lost. They're certainly unlike Season 6. They're presented here as threats that lurk around the smelters. If you get too close, they'll bite. Now, to be fair, they don't go nearly as hard as they did in Stepney Gets Lost. But personally, I think that if they had the chance, and Fergus hadn't run off, they would have. Furthermore, I appreciate how they're truly tied to the location of the smelters. It helps to make them seem like a true danger to the steam engines, as if you visit this mysterious location, they'll come and get you. If you're curious to hear more about Uri and Bert, a good friend of mine, Mr. Tugboat, and I actually recorded a whole podcast episode about them a few months ago. Link is in the description. Anyway, with shameless plugs aside, let's talk Thomas. In this episode, similar to how I said for something fishy, he feels right to me. Season 7 is at the end of the classic era, and therefore Thomas is at the end of his arc. To me, that indicates that he should feel kind and even nurturing, which is exactly how he's presented here. Thomas is concerned about Fergus, and goes out of his way to help find him. While I don't necessarily buy that Thomas would fully tolerate Fergus' stickling for the rules, I can get behind Thomas helping him out, due to how I feel he should be acting at this point in the show. All in all, the characterizations really sell Fergus Breaks the Rules as being one of the better of Season 7. Here's one that I hardly ever see people talking about. Frankly, I kind of forget it exists. But surprisingly enough, Not So Hasty Puddings is pretty great. One snowy day, not long before Christmas, Elizabeth brings Thomas a snowplow. Thomas naturally complains about it, and Elizabeth. Later on, Sir Topham Hatt hears that the Soto pudding factory is snowed in, and sends Elizabeth to collect the pudding and bring it to the docks, much to Thomas's chagrin. After a while, Elizabeth still hasn't come back, and Thomas and Terence are sent to go find her. As it turns out, she slid into the snow due to all the ice. Terence saves her, Thomas is celebrated, and he and Elizabeth reconcile. Man, the new writing team really seemed to get Thomas this season. Like the other two we've seen, I think that this serves as a good Thomas episode. He is temperamental and hates snowplows. Plus, at the end, he is sure to be kind to Elizabeth despite their differences. Pretty much hits all the beats. And speaking of those differences, that brings me to my favorite part of this episode, the Thomas and Elizabeth rivalry. Not only is this a plotline that is being brought back from last season, it's being built on, and ultimately reconciled. In the original Season 6 episode, Elizabeth helps Thomas after he breaks down. She teases him about this, annoying Thomas greatly. Then in this episode, the opposite happens, but instead of being teased, they ultimately find common ground by working together to help rescue the pudding. On top of that, it's kind of fun to see Thomas get irritated at her for no good reason, and ultimately, them overcoming their differences to save the day works well. Oh, and one last little thing. Listen to this line in the Season 6 episode, Elizabeth the Vintage Lorry.
She's not built for hills, he said anxiously.
Now consider how Elizabeth crashes in Not So Hasty Puddings.
Suddenly, she was on a steep hill. Her driver applied the brakes. Elizabeth slid out of control into a deep snowdrift. Poor Elizabeth.
That's some consistency right there. Now, sure, her running issues likely would have been fixed by Jem Cole in that episode, and her crash primarily happened from the ice, not the hill. But I still think that it's some clever continuity. Just one of the little things that helped to make this episode one of my favorites from Season 7. Moving right along, the Refreshment Lady's stand acts as a nice change of pace from the standing gauge stores we've seen so far. In this episode, it's been a hot summer on the island, and the Refreshment Lady is having a lot of business, more than her current lodging can support. Peter Sam helps her to find a new place for her stand, but she can't decide on any one location. A storm then occurs, and when Peter Sam is helping to clean up, he finds an old coach on the line and has an idea. The old coach is restored and turned into a new mobile refreshment stand, and the Refreshment Lady is very happy indeed. Alright, so first off, there's the obvious. This is once again a wonderful continuation of a prior storyline. The Refreshment Lady, a random human character that Peter Sam has had a prior run-in with all the way back in Season 4, is brought back for another story.
I love how in the original encounter, Peter Sam wrongs the refreshment lady, while here, he actually atones for his mistake by surprising her with a wonderful gift. It's a great end to this little old plotline, which seems to be something that Season 7 excels at. Furthermore, I appreciate how in-character Peter Sam is here. While he may be worried at times throughout the episode, he always finds a way to make himself and others happy once more. In addition, there's a little recurring bit about the phrase piece of cake. At the start, the refreshment lady calls finding a new spot for her to stand a piece of cake, and then at the end, she says,
I told you it'd be a piece of cake.
although there is something strange going on with how Peter Sam at the start doesn't understand what the term means, but at the end, he also says,
I told you it would be a piece of cake.
like, what? He never said that and was literally confused about what it meant the other day? I don't know, maybe that was an oversight, but I personally just find it kind of funny. Now for the extra credit points. Believe it or not, this episode's plot was directly inspired by an actual event from the Teleclone Railway. That's right, this Season 7 episode actually does something that, as far as I'm aware, hasn't happened since Season 5. It takes real-life inspiration for a story. In particular, this episode directly lifts the concept of a mobile refreshment coach, which served the Teleclone from 1963 to 1968. Although, to be fair, theirs was made from putting an actual refreshment stand on top of a coach chassis. Crazy stuff. Overall, the strengths of the refreshment stand are found with its characterization and how it gives credence to prior material. The Runaway Elephant. Now, admittedly, this one is barely making the list. I was originally going to make this the 6 hidden gems of Season 7, but I realized I could so easily add one more to make it 7 of Season 7, and I knew I just had to do it. So when I went back to scouring through the season, I settled on this goofy episode to get us there. Now let's get into the Runaway Elephant. In this episode, a new park is being built on the Scarlet Railway, complete with a station and all. Duncan is being boastful and claiming he's faster than everyone else, but he's sacrificing safety in doing so. When he's tasked with delivering an elephant statue to the new park, he and his driver neglect to take a brake van and run out of control. The episode ends with a crash, when the elephant is flung into the air and it lands in the lake at the park. First off, this is obviously a pretty silly crash, but it works considering the other much more absurd things Duncan has gotten himself into in this series. In addition, there's a nice action sequence. It's very similar to Renee's in the roller coaster, but where this one works and that one falters is that here, there's a clear and sensible reason as to why Duncan is out of control. For Renee's, he just goes down a bumpy line with one tiny coach and suddenly he's speeding down the line. For Duncan, however, he's being pulled by a flatbed with a big stone statue and he doesn't even have a brake van? Sounds like Runaway material right there. Next, there's some nice characterization. Duncan is certainly in character, he's always been pretty consistently reckless and brash, which is exactly how he's presented here. Rusty also fits pretty well, as he always values safety and tries to help Duncan as much as he can. I'll admit, the one thing that is wrong is how stupid Duncan's driver is, but he also was stupid enough to move the barriers in Trusty Rusty, so I guess it lines up. Topham's really gotta fire that guy. Oh, and lastly, there's some nice continuity with other episodes in this season, wherein the Scarlet Railway is constructing an extension. I'll touch more on that later though. All in all, a decent and pretty fun episode.
Decent? Decent? How dare you?
Wait, Tidmouth Yard Studios? How would you get in here?
Let me talk about the Runaway Elephant.
What?
I'll actually do it justice, unlike Jaden. Anyways, as my co-host, neglected to mention, this is in fact a great episode and has a fun action sequence with a funny crash. However, what I'm here to talk about is the score. Thomas is well known for its score, and Season 7 is no different. Both O'Donnell and Campbell really hit it out for their final season of Thomas, and Robert Hartshorn gave an interesting rescore. Anyways, the Runaway Elephant has plenty of good tracks. The O'Donnell and Campbell team give an interesting Duncan theme, which I really like. It's a more laid-back, but still recognizable rendition of the theme. However, I really like Robert Hartshorn's rescore better. It may be due to bias since I'm American, but let me explain. The intro starts with a good Engines at Work theme, signifying all the work going into this new line. Duncan's theme is good. There's an emphasis on the oboe, which I really like. It may sound like a typical negative Nancy theme, but who are you to say that doesn't make it good anyway?
I didn't say that.
Then, once Duncan picks up the elephant, the real fun begins. An upbeat but devious theme begins to play. Duncan starts to boast about how fast he can go, but suddenly, Duncan begins to speed up at an alarming rate. The piano begins to be heard alongside threatening strings, signifying danger on the horizon. Then there's a crescendo as Duncan is in full danger, nearly hitting a tractor. The main theme repeats itself as Duncan speeds by Rusty and continues on. Suddenly, the crescendo plays again as Duncan is about to crash, and once he does, the strings sound threatening as the elephant flies into the air and ends at the moment the elephant lands in the lake. Oh my god, I love this episode!
Alright, moving on. If you thought Not So Hasty Puddings was rarely talked about, just wait until you hear about this one. I bet if you were to ask a random survey of Thomas fans what they thought this episode was about from the title The Grand Opening alone, they couldn't even name a single character from it. The only way some fans remember this is that Rumblin' Bridge got merchandise, even though this toy looks absolutely nothing like it. However, I'm here to make the case for why I think it deserves at least a little bit more attention. In this episode, the Scarlet Railway has been building a brand new line to take visitors to more beautiful places around the island. The Topham Hatt announces that he plans to open it to the public later that day, but Scarlet arrives late for the announcement. Topham warns him not to be late again, and Scarlet apologizes. When it's time for the Topham Hatt and Lady Hat to depart, Harold has unfortunately broken down, so they have to take the red balloon instead. Scarlet, meanwhile, is struggling to finish his workload and fears he might be late once more. Just as the balloon passes overhead, the flame goes out, and they go down into a tree. Scarlet, who is passing by, saves the day and brings the Topham Hatt and Lady Hat to the opening. Ooh, pretty dense one. Before I start singing this episode's praises, I need to address the one glaring issue, that being Scarlet's characterization. Now, there's nothing particularly wrong here, but I'm sure many would take issue with how he's perpetually late. Honestly, I feel this might have been a better Peter Sam episode, as he's had some trouble in the past with arriving on time. Then again, it could just be that the workmen took forever to load the train. But with that aside, I do still think that Scarlet is portrayed well, as he is continually trying his hardest and understands the importance of timeliness. Moving on, my first point in this episode's favor is world building. The entire plot of this episode is based around the introduction of a new expansion to the Scarlet Railway. On top of that, this connects with an overarching season-long story, that being constructing this line in general. For instance, as mentioned earlier, the episode The Runaway Elephant hinges on a new station being opened, one that is likely meant to be placed on the same expansion featured here. I really appreciate how Season 7 weaves greater plotlines into the fabric of its structure, which is also evident in more speculated plotlines such as the Great Storm that overtakes the island, as featured in episodes such as The Refreshment Lady Stand or Salty's Stormy Tale. Furthermore, another point in this episode's favor is how well woven together its plotline is. A nice little example of this is the specific mention of how the workmen Scarlet is helping are using ladders, the same ladders that are used to rescue the Hats not long later. On a broader scale, a well thought out plot can be seen throughout the entire episode. Scarlet is late at the start, introducing the central crux of the episode immediately by showing us rather than telling us. I would even argue that Sir Topham Hatt persistently being wrong works as decent foreshadowing, considering how he emphasizes how perfect and fast the hot air balloon ride is minutes before it goes, well, whatever the opposite of up in flames would be. Oh, and another thing. I would honestly make an argument that this episode served as a good continuation of none other than Lady Hat's birthday party. You may be wondering, how? And to answer that, I have 4 simple words. The Hat family started this. Think about it. The entirety of the Season 5 episode is about how Topham is desperate not to be late to an important event for his wife. And the Season 7 episode is entirely about how Topham and his wife are desperate not to be late to an important event. Plus, in both episodes, they have to try multiple different methods of transport to get there in time. And in the end, they wind up looking rather untidy. I don't know, maybe I'm reading into things a little too much. One last thing that I swear I'm done talking about this 4.5 minute episode. It's just funny. Much like Lady Hat's birthday party, it finds humor in its human characters. The dynamic between Lady Hat and Sir Topham Hatt is just kept really light and comical, and it feels like the humor found in human characters from the first 6 seasons. Overall, the grand opening strengths come from its clever writing and continuity, despite how scarcely talked about it is. Truly one of the hidden gems of Season 7. We now come to our final hidden gem of today, and it's a favorite of mine, Snow Engine. In this episode, the island has a big snowstorm. Oliver, who dislikes snow, complains about it. Toad, meanwhile, tries to help him find the magic of it. Meanwhile, in a village, a great snowman is built by some children for a winter festival. Oliver is tasked to collect some goods needed for said festival, much to his chagrin. He complains about the cold, but then, at the village, the points are frozen over and he's diverted to a siding. He and Toad crash into the buffers, before ending up going right through the snowman itself. The next day, the children return to find Oliver, and decide to decorate him as a snow engine. Oliver ends up enjoying the winter festival so much that he finds the magic of snow, though Toad can't relate. My first reason as to why this episode is a hidden gem is, of course, the delightfully unique crash. While it is a bit unrealistic, I just think it's fun. Let me have this. My next point is that I think both Oliver and Toad are well characterized here. For one, Oliver disliking snow makes sense. For years, Oliver was on the run. In the winter, all that snow and ice could have done for him was slow him down, so in my eyes at least, it fits well for him to hold a grudge against it. Along with that, Toad being innocently entranced by the magic of snow, at least at first, is very, I don't know, Toad-like? But anyway, that aside, the most critical part of Oliver and Toad's characterizations are their arcs. While minor, I greatly appreciate the fact that the characters had mirrored arcs, with Oliver hating snow and Toad loving it at the beginning, and both having each other's original opinion by the end. One last brief point. I just want to shout out the fun and lighthearted tone this episode maintains. Like, Toad sliding up next to Oliver, going against all logic, and his delivery of
That could have been a little smoother.
always makes me chuckle. It's just so goofy, I love it. Overall, the characterization and levity really sell Snow Engine as being one of the hidden gems of Season 7. Ultimately, after going in depth on all these episodes, there's one main point that's common to almost all of them, and that's characterization. Maybe that just gives a little look into how I like my Thomas episodes, or maybe it represents a larger strength of Season 7, I don't know. But what I do know is that it's a major asset that sells these episodes. In addition, many of them excel at continuing prior storylines, some of which feature characters that haven't even been seen since their original stories. I also know that in this season there are even more episodes of that nature that I didn't even mention here. And finally, a lot of them are just fun. Whether that be from their crashes, or their banter, or just their tone, these episodes can be a joy to watch for more than just nostalgia. Overall, Season 7, an often overlooked season, deserves a little more attention, at least in my opinion. And that's it. That's the video. This ended up being much longer than I first imagined. Who would have guessed that I'd have 800 words to say about the grand opening? I hope you all enjoyed nonetheless. What do you think of Season 7 and my episode choices? Also, if you like this format, let me know and I might make another, maybe for Season 6, or a part 2. I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like or maybe subscribing. With all that said, thank you for watching, see you in the next one. Goodbye!